Sup gamers, Rainy Potato here with a new hero tier list for the Kingdoms Coven faction. This tier list is specifically for the Coven module for Kingdoms, and more specifically for the hardest difficulty setting in Coven Kingdoms, the random skills and random paths. So let's go ahead and get started with Abomination. Abomination was quite good in the Beast Clan. He was sort of specifically made for Beast Clan. I find him a little bit weaker in Coven, partly because the movement stuff is relevant, but not as relevant. And most importantly, the Abomination really suffers with, random skills. You could get all beast form. You always get transform, I believe. I think that's a thing. But you could get all human skills. You could get all beast skills. His skills, his paths, can range from great to just random. Obviously, especially with the random skill sets, you can, get unchained, but not get anything human. You could get, just weird setups. The biggest problem with Abomination overall has always been his mastery, and you need way more mastery in Coven and random skills. One positive is your blight stuff is much better, obviously, since you're not facing blight-resistant enemies. And pulls are sometimes good. Pulling the cauldron, although it's pretty hard to pull the cauldron sometimes. Pulling the kerfs, or the dedicants, I guess they call them. Pulling the virago, those all matter. But not as much as, well, honestly sometimes more, because you don't really like pulling the walkers. The removal is okay. Stun resist is a bit higher than the Beast Clan, so Backlash is a little bit worse. Like I said, the Ichor, just overall, obviously Absolution helps. I value any hero with any sort of self-heal, self-stress heal. And obviously you have Unchained, where you can do sort of quasi-stress healing. Honestly, just being adjacent allies. This is a pretty small bonus. I'd never have Abomination as like my main healer. Frankly, I don't like really any of his paths. I'd rather just play Wanderer. I'd rather just play, Instinct Rage stuff, which is a little bit worse because you're not running up against the riposte. So he's usable. It's just, especially if you're running random, not my cup of tea. Again, he still suffers from stress issues as far as the team, and without really the damage to back it up. So I would definitely put the Abomination in the okay tier. Never really awful, just not like my first choice ever. Next is Bounty Hunter. So obviously Bounty Hunter in Kingdoms does not have any paths. So this does make the Bounty Hunter a lot more predictable, because you're not going to get some random off-the-wall paths. The random skills, honestly, Bounty Hunter has such a good balance of skills. You got Bounty, which can do fat damage with any combo. You're also very rank flexible, which has also been one of the benefits of running Bounty Hunter in Kingdoms, just how flexible. It's very easy to run in rank 3, 1, 2, or 3. You could run in 4, although it's not as good. Dodge removal is still good. It's maybe even better in this mode when you're facing off against the virago. Especially, obviously, the Vaughn. Pull, still pull. Caltrop's not as good because of the immunity by the cauldron. The speed debuff is kind of whatever. It's kind of okay against back row dedicant. Flashbang, only usable if it's upgraded. Taunts. Taunts are a little bit better in this module versus the Beast Clan, who were very rank dependent, so Taunt was not as strong. Taunt's a little bit stronger here. Obviously, you get the weaken. Hurlbat. Hurlbat is Hurlbat. The stuns are actually quite useful. Stuns are always useful. I've found Finish Him is pretty useful as well. And of course, Bodyguard is always useful. Guards of any type are always very strong. It's like the Bounty Hunter lacks any sort of self-sustain or, no heals, no stress heals. Not a nuker either. You're not doing Helion damage. But in combination with the big HP pool and the fact that you're basically never going to roll a bad Bounty Hunter, basically every Bounty Hunter kit is going to be pretty strong. I'll put it in the second tier. All right, Crusader. Crusader's pretty spicy, obviously. Crusader is a do-it-all hero, which is very important in Kingdoms. Big HP pool, has a taunt, has regen, has heals, has stress heals. This is basically the only, I guess, unless you count Vestal, but Vestal doesn't count because she can't heal herself with stress. The only one that can play healer, stress healer, tank, and damage dealer role. I generally prefer Wanderer. If you're going to play all 4 roles, just because you get the smite damage. But Banneret's also a very lucky role. You get your extra heal. You can play back row if you want, although most people still play Banneret front row. Templar I found is actually pretty useful, specifically in Kingdoms, because if you run a Crusader Vestal combo, you can really get big regens for your rallying cry. Aggressor is useless as always, but Aggressor isn't like active. Some paths, especially the newer, more fancy paths, some are just completely random and you can't run them. Aggressor you can just run as normal Crusader. So yeah, you're never mad at there are a few, you get Stunning Blow, Reap, Tenacity, Radiance. If you don't get the heal or the stress heal or the taunt, you're kind of sad. But there's not really any complete disastrous kits. There are no bad paths. You're always going to be happy with the HP. You're always going to be happy with the roll. This is actually, I don't know if it's controversial, but it's controversial for me. He just does so much. Especially, this is very specific for the random skills, random path setup. He just does everything. Any team, any loadout, any path, he does what you need him to do. Should probably create another 5th tier, because he's definitely not as good as the top, but you're never sad to see him. Duelist, on the other hand, you're always ashamed to see Duelist. I will say Duelist is a bit better when considering random paths. Maybe not random paths, but random skills. Because unlike her mystery kits, you can get meditation. The downside of random skills with the Duelist is sometimes you just get complete garbage. You'll get the boot, not on antagonist. You'll get instruction. You'll just get random skills that don't actually do damage. And Duelist already barely does damage without massive setup. Her HP is garbage. There's just no reason to ever want Duelist on your team. So you can get very specific setups. If you get a very strong antagonist setup, if you get a very specific Instructus setup, can sometimes have value. Specifically Instructus with A-Bomb is pretty spicy. But again, these sort of like super long setup when you have to devote a ton of mastery to be valuable, when we have no HP, when you're relying exclusively on dodge. I just can't put Duelist in any tire but the last. All right, now Flag. Flag is pretty interesting for the random. I find Flag much, much worse when we're talking about random paths. Mostly because of Exanimate. I just don't like Exanimate. You're losing out on big sepsis, especially since, you're not in a random path, random skill type challenge. You're not going to be getting sepsis value here. I'd much rather just be running a tank Flag if we're going to be running a Flag at all. Similar with Scourge, although Scourge has the benefit of Omega Deathless. And Maniac is actually pretty good, specifically against the Dedicants because of the negative token play. I guess you could say the same about against the Custode, although the Custode no one really cares about because she doesn't do anything. I just find it's much better in non-random skill sets because you always get the Wanderer. You're always going to be happy with Sepsis, which makes your Mores, your Deathlesses, your Undying, your Suffers play much better. I will say with random skills, you can start with More, which is a huge boost instead of having to pay for it. Same with you can start with good kits. There are only a handful of bad random starts you can get with Flag. Like Fester, Deathless, Endure, Suffer, Lash's Gift specifically. If you get like no attacks, you're pretty sad. If you don't get more Sepsis, any of the heals, you're pretty sad. Flag also sort of counts as like a quasi do-it-all character. You can stress heal, you can tank, you can heal. Endure isn't quite as good until you get some setup because you still have to deal with negative relationship nonsense. And of course, the biggest mark against Flag is death. You very often get death early. You very often, especially if you're running, random stuff where your teams are not strong, you're getting obliterated by death. You're getting obliterated by death in Escalation 2, which is very fast. That's why I generally try to keep Flag in my secondary team, in one of my siege teams, where you don't care about, negative relationships. You don't care about going toxic. You don't care about death. You just game, which is something Flag is good at. I probably just have to put Flag in the second tier. It's so weird seeing Flag below Crusader, but with death looming and with some of the random starting skill sets that require a lot of setup, not happy. All right, Grave Robber. Grave Robber also, in my opinion, kind of suffers a little bit with the randomness because you can get garbage like Night Sworn or Venom Drop. Venom Drop obviously isn't as bad as against the Beast Clan because you're much more likely to proc your Blight versus obviously the Beast Clan. You can't do anything against the boss and you're really hurting against with that 50% resist against normal enemies. Obviously Deadeye's pretty strong. Makes flashing daggers real. Few points Grave Robber does have going for token corpse removal, lots of self-healing, and in my opinion her best attribute for the Coven is Glint in the Dark. This is big damage, execution, all against the stealth. It is a little sad to not have any sort of removal against dodge, which is what the Dedicants usually have. But this is enough damage to nuke maybe a half health Dedicant, depending on the escalation, of course. So Glint is huge, rank 1 through 3. You can't be in the back. which kind of sucks because Grave Robber usually likes being in the back. You're also pretty happy with a dodge taunt. You're a little tankier than the Duelist since you self-heal. So yeah, the only real bad kit, I mean, Venom Drop's not great either. But Nightsworn, I hate Nightsworn. Losing HP is atrocious. Well, I guess you don't lose HP anymore. I don't know why I said that. The random kits generally are going to find something you like. It's highly likely you start out with one of the heals. It's highly likely you get one of her strong attacks. Yeah, you might roll Pirouette, you might roll Shadow Fade, you might roll Lunge. But it's very, very unlikely you roll an unusable kit out of the gate. I used to have Grave Robber in the bottom tier. I think I put her definitely behind Abomination. But I think she belongs above Duelist now. Just the self-heals and Glint. That's literally it for me. Helion. Helion is still Helion. The biggest problem, again, with random paths is 2 of her paths are garbage. Well, Wanderer is honestly not that great. You're still doing okay damage. You know, Howl is still Howl. Adrenaline Rush is still insane. Still has Revelry. There's a lot to like about her kit. But obviously it's not as good as Ravager. Berserker is completely unplayable, obviously. Especially in Kingdoms where HP matters. Carcass is okay. Carcass is a little bit better against the Coven because of the stealth removal. The weaken. The stun. It's okay, but like, why would you run Carcass when you can run Man-at-Arms and just get Perma Block Plus instead of Perma Block? Obviously, she can remove stress, but again, I don't like wasting a rank 1 spot. I guess she doesn't have to be rank 1. Rank 1 or rank 2 spot, doing literally 0 damage. If you roll Ravager, obviously you're a god. You know, if you run Ravager, you're going to get your free HP. You're going to get your Omega damage. Iron Swan is still amazing because it lets you obliterate the Cauldron. So the only issues, like I said, you can also roll really bad kits. Like, look at how many worthless skills the Helion has. You know, Breakthrough, Bleed Out, Bloodlust, Barbaric Yop, sometimes useless. One problem is this doesn't reach rank 3, so those rank 3 Dedicons aren't going to be de-stealthed. This also doesn't ignore dodge, which makes it quite worse as a stealth removal against the Dedicons. So you can start out with a completely worthless kit. And obviously if you're running something like Carcass, like obviously Howling In, you know, this makes like 90% of your kit worthless. If you're running Berserker, like 90% of your kit is worthless if you don't roll the perfect. Big damage dealer really helps you in road fights, really helps you. If you get Super Ravager, you know, you can obliterate the boss. If you've seen any of my boss wins, you know, where I'm basically one-turning the boss, it's always with Helion. So she's still very, very good. I'd put her in the second tier. She just doesn't do as much as, you know, the do-it-all characters up here. Can move on to Hyroman. Not a lot's changed with Hyroman between here and Beast Clan. My problems with Hyroman and Beast Clan were not a lot of self-sustain. A little bit better with randomness, I think, because you can roll Sharp Shot. Pistol Shot's huge against the Cauldron because you can nuke rank 3 or rank 4 Cauldron. Grape Shot's obviously much better to hit, you know, ranks 3 and 4 rather than ranks 1 and 2, especially when we're talking about Cauldron, especially when we're talking about, you know, back row Dedicons and Viragos with dodge. You want to proc that while you're hitting the Cauldron. Rogue. I actually ran Rogue on a recent run. I have a big problem with Rogue just because there's not a lot of sustain here. Like this has always been my problem with Rogue, by the way, the new Rogue. You know, you want to be riposted, but you don't actually, you get 1 block token. Congratulations. And you also don't get as much riposte as Wanderer. Of course, you're supposed to be using Take Aim, but Take Aim gives you absolutely nothing. So you got to run like maybe double cross and get yourself 1 token. One positive is obviously you have Tracking Shot. This is one of a handful of stealth removal skills. This actually ignores dodge like a proper de-stealth skill should. Screw you, Helion. Also cannot gain dodge. That's not as important, but it's sometimes relevant against the Cauldron. So at least this is relevant. That also makes the random skills more relevant. The fact that Tracking Shot is a real skill. It's pretty hard to be a worthless, completely worthless Hyroman. You're always going to either have, Wicked Slice, Open Vein, Duelist, Highway Robbery, not as strong. Although with the Cauldron bubble, it's actually not too bad. But you're never getting a worthless kit. Even if you're like, Yellow Hand's pretty bad. But you're never worthless here. If you high roll Sharp Shot, you're really happy. This is close to, it's not S tier, but it's very, very strong. Just because you can solo target the Cauldron. But overall, doesn't do anything but damage. And doesn't have any outright nukes, really. Like, the Helion or Leper has. So, unfortunately, have to put him down here. Probably like him better than these two, though. Jester, another one I don't like because of lack of any sort of self-sustain. Does have a stress heal. Issue with this, Jester was actually better in Beast Clan solely because of Fury. This made horror removal like very, very strong since Rotclaw would just spam horror on you. But Jester in every other, actually in every way, I think Jester has become weaker in Coven because not just Coven, but in the random skills, random paths. You have so many of these random paths. Intermezzo is strong, obviously. But stuff like Virtuoso and Soloist are so super dependent on like building a team around. And you need your skills to line up perfectly. Intermezzo and Wanderer, you can basically do whatever you want. So those are much stronger. It's a positive and a negative. The random skills. With the mystery skill sets that were pre-selected, Virtuoso and Soloist were completely dead because you would never start with, your Encore Solo Finale. You'd always start with some random-ass kit with, like, Echoing March and Harvest. So it would be very, very expensive to make a useful Jester. Now, you can get your perfect start, your Encore Solo Finale, but you can also just get, like, Virtuoso with, Slice Off, Harvest, Play Out. And then you're like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Like, you might not get Encore at all. And, of course, you need to upgrade Encore to be that happy. It takes so much for Jester to be good. In my opinion, still the best use for Jester, at least in Kingdoms, is just Fade and Razor's Wit. Maybe sometimes Harvest to get those 2-3 hits that Custo Dedicant hit. And obviously Inspiring Tune if you need some sort of stress heal. But between his pathetic HP pool and just the randomness of the kits you can get, like you'll get Finale, Slice Off, Harvest, Echoing March, Tune. Like, what are you doing with that? Obviously, if you don't get Razor's Wit and Fade to Black, you'll have to unlock one. Just very mastery hungry for someone who doesn't actually do that much. It's hard to put in Duelist tier, so I'll just put in this tier. Now on to Leper. Leper. Leper is definitely much worse with the randomness. Because because you can roll Monarch. Monarch is obviously worthless. You're losing HP for no reason. You don't care about Cosmic because Cosmic is just one random enemy type in one single region. It's so bad. It's so bad. And Tempest is not exactly what you want in Kingdoms because you're losing your HP. Poet, if you can get lucky enough to roll, Wanderer is okay-ish. Problem is you're just not doing that much. Now if you can get Poet, you're pretty happy. Just having that move resist is useful in a lot of different comps. We can talk about Intimidate a little bit. A lot of people were oogling over, Intimidate because it's stealth removal, one of few. But it doesn't pierce dodge, which makes it pretty worthless against Dedicants, who are almost always going to be shadow capping with some dodge on them. So again, just... at least it can hit, the back row, unlike Barbaric Yop, which is complete garbage, but... overall, I don't really rate Intimidate as stealth removal. It's still obviously a great skill, and really only worthwhile on Poet because you can park yourself on rank 1. As far as random skills go, there are a lot of bad skills on Leper. Reflection, Ruin, Revenge... these are things break. These are things you're not going to be running Hue. That's like half the skills that you're just not going to be running outside of like specific fights. So you're just... but on the other hand, as long as you have, Solemnity, Intimidate, Purge, Chop, you're never the worst. It's just... you don't high roll that often. Unless you're specifically going to run Tempest. Run Tempest with like a Ritualist or something normal like that. And then try to high roll. Even then, you're not really doing that much more than, a Ravager Helion. And this is at the cost of your HP pool. I've never found, and of course, if you're running, non-Tempest, if you're running, Poet, having the Purge, having the Bash, having the Intimidate, nerfed with the Combat Start blinds has always been annoying. That's another problem I've had with Leper. Is, I get the whole chop thing. Haha, funny. It's kind of like DD1 with the accuracy, but you're also just hurting, your utility skills. Again, Solemnity. Love this skill. I generally like him in my siege teams to just soak up damage because he doesn't do that much else. I do wonder if I have to put him in the Duelist tier. Obviously much better than Duelist, just because of the HP pool and the heal. He's probably somewhere up here. Keep Duelist in the Duelist tier. Alright, now we get to the real heroes. You all know Man-at-Arms. Definitely weaker in the random, and also definitely weaker specifically against the Coven, because Man-at-Arms relies heavily on block tokens, stand fast, defend, bolster. But his HP pool usually means that the Decants don't completely obliterate him, even when they're stealthed. Now, another benefit is you never have bad skills with Man-at-Arms. Every single skill except, like, Abandon. Although Abandon actually has use against, in specifically one path. And, like, Strategic Withdrawal is kind of mid. For the most part, you're always getting skills you want. Like, all of these skills are good, basically. It's impossible to have a 5-skill. Like, what's the worst 5-skill lineup you could get? Abandon, Withdrawal, Command, Defender, Bellow. That's still not the worst. The biggest problem is you can roll stuff like Sergeant. I will say Sergeant is much, much better in Kingdoms because you're upgraded... what is it? Retribution? Yeah, your upgraded Retribution will always proc with any sort of fatigue. So it's much better. And then speed's always speed. So like Sergeant isn't bad. The only problem with Sergeant is you have to specifically roll. I really can't justify Sergeant unless you're getting like, you're starting out with like Crush and then maybe 2 or 3 of these skills. Whereas like Wanderer, if I have like Defender, I'm happy. That is one thing with The mystery paths, I believe all the mystery paths had Crush Defender. Although you have more paths now with Bolster, so that's on the other side. Bulwark also isn't too bad. This is, again, Bellows still strong. No cooldown. Removing tokens from the Cauldron is good. You're still getting... you're still getting some juice. I just... Obviously, Bulwark is worse than Wanderer to me in most ways. Same with Vanguard. Vanguard is obviously much, much weaker because you can't do Omega Taunting with Vanguard. But you're still big HP. You're at least doing a little bit more damage. So it's very hard for a Man-at-Arms to be bad. Even if you get the worst kit in the world. So definitely up in the top tier. All right, Occultist, our friend. Occultist. 3 very strong paths. Wanderer is also very good. Obviously, in my opinion, Ritualist is the best because the heal becomes real. Despite all the crit 0 memes, the heal is still real. You're very happy weakening enemies. You're very happy getting through dodge. Warlock's a little bit better. Obviously, like I've said, I hated Warlock against the Beast Clan because of the Huntsman just completely obliterating you. Rank 4 does not really receive much pressure against the Coven. We haven't really talked about it because we're moving on right now to our rank 4 heroes. But rank 4 doesn't face much pressure. You still want to guard. You definitely want dot removal. I definitely don't like bringing Warlock without, PD or Vestal to get rid of those dots if needed. Or at least have like a Man-at-Arms to protect. But you're facing much less back row pressure, so you're much more free to just nuke away with Reckless Abandon, even though the HP is pitiful and you're going to be in the teens basically the whole run. Aspirant's okay. HP is always good. Block is always good. I value the curses too much to really be too happy, but you're doing okay damage. There are better frontliners in my opinion. But, none of these paths are bad. Like, if you're running random paths, you can make any of these work. You also, none of these skills are bad. What's a bad skill set, if you're not, even Chaotic Offering, if you get it, you're like, okay, so I use, Burning Stars, wow. Or I unlock Burning Stars. Maybe you can get a bad kit if you get, Sack Stab, Curse, Malediction, and Amnesis on Warlock. You have Corpse Clear, like you just, or if you get App Sprint and you get you get the curses, you're sad. But I think most Occultist builds are quite good in Kingdoms. Definitely slot him up here somewhere, probably behind these two. Honestly, Flag does a lot, especially with the big HP pool. But with Death, Occultist is somewhere up here, definitely. Plague Doctor. Do we have to talk about Plague Doctor? We do. Another one that took a bit of a nerf. Only a slight nerf, though, in Coven. Because of the randomness. Although, I will say, in Beast Clan, you always wanted Surgeon. Just because of the Blight Resist, Surgeon was what you wanted. And because of the Huntsman, like we just talked about with Warlock. Although Alchemist is obviously much tankier than Warlock because lack of self-burn. And in fact, she gets buffs for her resistances. I will say you can roll Wanderer, Surgeon, or Alchemist and be very, very happy. Very, very happy. Now that Alchemist can actually kill the boss without trinkets. And you obviously don't need to be as protective as rank 4. Surgeon is still Surgeon. Wanderer is basically, Surgeon / Alchemist minus. The biggest problem is obviously Physician. I do actually like Disorienting Blast, but if you don't get Disorienting Blast, or Vapors is kind of whatever. If you don't get the heals, if you roll Physician without the heals and without Disorienting Blast, you're just garbage. You also, I don't really run Physician outside of rank 3 because it's not like you're doing the random stuff every turn. You still want to just be doing damage, which you have to have Incision to do, even though you're not actually doing damage. It's also, outside of Physician, it's hard to roll a bad kit. You roll Physician without Stab, you pay a Mastery to get Stab. Alchemist, you're almost always going to have at least one of these skills. Then you just buy the other one. Maybe you have to buy, a heal. But with the random skills, you also can get Indiscriminate Science or Magrain. Some of those top skills that you just don't get with mystery skill sets, or with obviously the standard starting skill set. So PD is still PD. We're all waiting on the nerfs. But until then, PD supremacy. Now Runaway we've talked about a lot. Runaway, I've always liked Runaway, for the record. But Runaway really started to shine in Kingdoms. People started to take notice. She doesn't honestly need that much. So I will say, most of her skills are completely worthless, garbage. Firestarter, Backdraft, Dragonfly's okay, Ransack's okay in certain situations. Hearthlight. Half of her skills are bad. But all you need is Firefly. You really want these 4 skills, and that's all you ever need. But if you have Firefly, you can make a good Arsonist. I will say there is slightly more burn resist in the Coven, and more specifically, the Cauldron has quite high burn resist. Even Arsonist can't get through sometimes. So that's one negative. You're also, with random paths, Orphan with the HP, I just don't like it as much as Arsonist. You also need to pick up some piercings somehow. Survivor, I'm not the biggest fan of. I don't really care about big regen. I don't care about bigger cauterizes. I do care about, the dodge and the speed, whatever. I don't like dancing. So I'm pretty unhappy, honestly, to roll anything but Arsonist. But Wanderer, Arsonist, and Orphan are all acceptable paths. Better than your normal rank 4. I'd probably rank these two below Warlock and Alchemist, but ahead of everything else. And of course we can talk about specifically against the Coven. We have Hearthlight. Hearthlight. We talked about this before the release when we knew Stealth was coming. But Hearthlight's insane. You can get rid of... This is, I believe, the only AoE stealth removal. Which sometimes you'll get 2 shadow-capped enemies. Sometimes, if you can't break the Cauldron will give AoE stealth. This also ignores dodge like a D-stealth should. It also hits everything, so you don't have to, pick and choose. No. You do this. You hit everyone. It's also an insane upgrade. Which who had ever imagined you'd be upgrading Hearthlight? Unironically. This not only ignores your blind. I believe this is the only D-stealth to do that. Which matters because there's... not only in Kingdoms in general, there's light problems. So you can get self-blind. There's also the Dedicant, which applies blind. So you can ignore the blind, ignore the dodges, and remove your own blind, which the Dedicants can apply and transplant to other heroes. So Hearthlight is an S tier skill. I don't always use it because sometimes, you just spam Firefly and you don't really care. But just very, very strong against the Coven. outside of the Cauldron, which hopefully you pack some sort of direct damage to deal with the Cauldron. Either a Hyroman or a Helion. Cauterize is still universally useful. I believe every region has some sort of bleed, including road fights. Smokescreen is still smokescreen. Run and hide is still run and hide. Run and hide's actually quite good here because of the Cauldron burn. So you can just zip that away. As far as random skills, like I said, if you get Firefly and then like one of these skills, you're GG. Or even like this, one of these Firefly and then like one of these 4 and then GG. Not very expensive to get her kit up, even if you roll really, really badly. The only time you're ever sad is if you're a survivor. And even then, you can, just figure it out. Definitely in the top tier. And finally, we have the Vestal. The Vestal, again, got stronger, in my opinion, against the Coven. Specifically, the Omega, the Ultimate. Even better. Is it better than Hearthlight? Probably not quite better than Hearthlight. But this is insane against the Dedicons. At least it depends on the path, obviously, because Illuminations, so we'll have to look at all the Illuminations. This ignores dodge, like a proper D-Stealth should. This also dazes, which is amazing because the Dedicons are very fast. I believe 7 base speed is what they are. So not only are you removing their stealth, but you're dazing them because even if, you remove their stealth, they still have their crit token after their shadow cap. So you daze them so you can obliterate them the next turn before they even act and use that crit token. And I will say, like I said, Vestal, a lot of people have been liking what Vestal brings to the table. You have regen, which gets even stronger because this is a regen 4 once you get into the hero upgrades. You have ministrations. Actually, I kind of like ministrations. It's still not better than Plague Doctor because Plague Doctor can also remove stun and daze with Indiscriminate Science. But here, obviously, with multiple dazes from the Dedicons, from the Custodes, from everyone, that becomes relevant, along with, obviously, the dot removal, one of a handful of dot removals. You still have your stress heal here. I never use Vestal as a main stress healer because she'll get stressed out herself. Just look at the Wanderer kit. There are not really any bad. What's a bad skill set here? Hand of Light, Consecrations, Mantra, Sanctuary, maybe Divine Grace. I'm a Divine Grace hater, by the way. I don't really like my Vestal as my main healer with Divine Grace. I don't like that cooldown. Usually I like her to pair up with someone. Not a bad pair up with Occultist. You get the regen combined with the weird, combined with ministrations. You're pretty happy. I do also like Vestal, specifically against the Coven for Judgment. Judgment hits any rank, makes her strong against the Cauldron. If you're running Wanderer or Seraph, you can just Omega Nuke with the plus damage. You're also not really mad about any pads. Confessor is still strong. With Confessor, you don't get the daze, obviously, with Illumination, but you still can just straight up remove the crit token, which might even be better. With Chaplain's really the only path I don't like. Just because I don't like Mace. I don't like frontline Vestal that much. Mostly because you don't get the double damage until you get 3 tokens. But it's not too bad. But you're not mad about any paths. Like Chaplain's playable. You get the Hand of Light. In rank 2, you can still get Divine Comfort. You can still get the Ministrations. Seraph, I don't really use Seraph because it's so slow. Or I don't like using Seraph. But if you get it randomly, you're not sad about Seraph if you get it. Even if you'd rather have like Confessor. Obviously, Confessor is actually very, very strong with the Mantra. I rarely use Mantra. But specifically against the Coven, you know, they're hitting you with so many negative tokens. You can just get rid of them, get a nice little heal. You know, like I said, not really a main healer to me. So she does have stress heal. She does have healing. She has damage. She has kind of tankiness if you're running a Sanctuary or Hand of Light with the scroll. Big HP pool. I kind of like the big HP. I like the big HP pool in Beast Clan better because you can park her in rank 4 and she can just take Huntsman nukes turn after turn. But I'd still say she's definitely in the top tier. Probably put her somewhere in this rank. So I'm actually pretty happy with how the Coven turned out. You know, any of these 9 heroes, basically any path you get, any random skill set you get, you know, you can just go with anytime. Makes it hard for you to get completely brick on a team. And then these heroes can, you know, occasionally show up with big skill sets, but well, some of them, you know, sometimes you can high roll a Hyroman, high roll a Jester, high roll a Grave Robber, high roll an A-Bomb. Kind of hard to high roll a Leper. He's just there. But, you know, they're not useless. Duelist is useless, but slightly more useful just because she can get meditation at base. Like I said, pretty happy with how the heroes in Coven turned out and looking forward to hopefully getting the rest of these reworks done this summer. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to let me know what you thought of the tier list and let me know how your own tier list differs. Good night.